The rejection wasn't new. Humanity had faced it time and again. From the moment Earth first sent out its signals into the void, they had hoped to find a place among the stars. At first, the idea was simple: to trade, to explore, to learn from the galactic powers. But as Earth's technology grew, so did its ambition. And with that ambition came the realization that no one wanted to be their ally. Not the Kresh, with their hive-like intellects, not the sleek, enigmatic Perel, nor the ancient Falcori, whose minds had outlasted civilizations. They all saw humanity as too unpredictable, too aggressive, too human. The galaxy was a place of power, and humanity was far too young and raw to be trusted. Despite their rejections, humanity had not given up. They continued to reach out, persistently pushing for diplomatic discussions, even as their voices were ignored. They sent envoys to the Intergalactic Council, a collection of the most powerful races across the galaxy, but each time, the message was the same: not yet, maybe in another 1,000 years. And so, Earth carried on, a small blue dot in the infinite cosmos. But when the Tarvath arrived, everything changed. It was a warm spring day when humanity first saw the darkness in their skies. The first signal was a strange anomaly, detected at the edge of the Sol system. At first, astronomers thought it was a glitch in their systems, a stray comet, or a malfunctioning sensor. But then it happened again, and again. A series of irregular pulses, something purposeful, coming from deep space. Then, without warning, a fleet of ships appeared. The Tarvath, a race humanity had only heard whispers of, descended on Earth's outer colonies with terrifying speed. They were massive ships, thick, jagged, and intimidating, their surfaces covered in black, reflective alloys that seemed to absorb all light around them. Their appearance was not one of diplomacy, but of conquest. Each ship was a fortress, each one a weapon of unimaginable destruction. The galaxy had heard of the Tarvath before. A race with no history of mercy, they were known for their brutal invasions and annihilation of entire civilizations. No one had dared challenge them, until now. The Tarvath's approach was swift and relentless. Within hours, their fleet had engaged human defense stations on the outer rim. The response from Earth was immediate, but not enough. The defenses, though advanced for their time, were no match for the Tarvath's overwhelming firepower. Human ships, despite their innovative designs and raw determination, were simply not prepared to face such an advanced enemy. Colonies fell one after another. The first to be wiped out was Mars. The Tarvath attacked without warning, their ships ripping through the atmosphere with ease, sending waves of destruction down to the surface. The human outposts, scattered across the Red Plains, had no chance. The survivors fled to the nearest ships, but many were destroyed before they could escape. As the destruction spread, Earth's leaders scrambled for answers. There was no time to waste. The emergency protocols were activated. The military was mobilized, and the brightest minds of humanity were called to action. But all efforts seemed futile. The Intergalactic Council remained silent. Not a single alien ship arrived to offer assistance. The silence from the Council was deafening. Humanity had been abandoned. It was at this darkest moment that humanity's greatest asset became clear: their resilience. Humanity had always been underestimated, its greatest strength lying not in its technology or resources, but in its spirit. It was that spirit that fueled their determination to survive. While the rest of the galaxy sat by, watching the carnage unfold, the humans did not fold. They rallied. They organized. Every scientist, engineer, and military strategist turned their focus to one goal: survival. Humanity had something to prove, and they were about to show the galaxy just how far they were willing to go to secure their place among the stars. But there was a secret buried beneath the surface of Earth, one that no one had ever fully understood, not even humanity itself. It was a relic of the distant past, a powerful energy that could change everything. But who would dare to use it? And at what cost? As the Tarva ships neared Earth's atmosphere, their leader's voice echoed through the comms of their fleet, a voice both calm and chilling. Surrender now, or face the consequences. And in that moment, Earth's leaders made a decision. Humanity would never surrender. The galaxy would soon learn that no one could afford to ignore humanity any longer. The war for survival had begun, and humanity would fight back. The first few days of the Tarvath invasion felt like a waking nightmare. The news broadcasted across every channel, across every city on Earth, the same horrifying message. We are under attack. All civilians are advised to evacuate immediately. But it was too late for most. The Tarvath did not give them time to escape, did not allow them the luxury of preparation. They struck like predators, swift and brutal, leaving nothing but ash in their wake. The outer colonies fell first: Mars, Europa, Titan. Entire human settlements were wiped from existence, their inhabitants vaporized before they even realized the full scope of the threat. The interplanetary defense fleets, once the pride of humanity's military, were overpowered with shocking ease. The Tarvath's weapons were like nothing humanity had encountered, plasma cannons capable of reducing entire fleets to molten scrap in a heartbeat. Their ships were armored with a material that absorbed even the most sophisticated human weaponry, and their tactics were savage. Relentless bombardments, planetary invasions that left no survivors, no prisoners. On Earth, the shock of the invasion reverberated through every city. In the chaos, governments scrambled for control. The UN Security Council, now in a state of emergency, convened for an emergency summit. But the discussions were futile. There were no allies to call on, no galactic powers coming to humanity's aid. The Intergalactic Council had remained silent, as they always had. The words humanity had heard for decades echoed in their minds. Not yet. Maybe in another 1,000 years. The message was clear. Humanity was on its own. In the halls of Earth's military command, General Lydia Hargrave stared at the monitors, her face grim. Earth's defense systems were being torn apart before her eyes. The few remaining fleets had retreated into orbit around Earth, but they were too few, too late. She slammed her fist onto the desk, frustration boiling within her. How could they have been so unprepared? Humanity had grown accustomed to progress, to the idea that their technology could overcome any threat. But this was different. The Tarvath were something else entirely. "We can't hold out much longer," one of her officers said, his voice tinged with panic. "We need reinforcements. Anything." "Where are the council?" Hargrave's expression darkened. "The council isn't coming." The words stung in the air, but they were the truth. Humanity had been alone since the first signs of the Tarvath. And now, Earth was facing the undeniable reality. Either they found a way to fight back, or they would be annihilated. In the depths of Earth's most secure research facilities, a different kind of storm was brewing. While the world panicked, a team of scientists, engineers, and former military personnel worked in secrecy, hidden from the chaos above. Dr. Samuel Reynolds, a leading physicist who had long theorized about the possibility of harnessing ancient energy sources, was the first to realize the terrible truth. A long-forgotten relic buried beneath Earth's crust had always been dismissed as myth. A relic of a civilization predating humanity itself, left behind long before humans even learned to speak. The Nexus Core. It had been buried for centuries, the last vestige of a race long gone, yet somehow preserved through the ages. Now, with humanity on the brink of extinction, it was the last hope. The scientists worked tirelessly, deciphering the arcane technology that powered the Nexus Core. They were fueled by the singular belief that this mysterious artifact was humanity's only shot at survival. Yet even as they worked, the fear of what they might unleash gnawed at them. They were playing with forces they didn't fully understand. But in that moment, no one cared about the risks. The alternative, total annihilation, was far worse. "We're running out of time," Reynolds said as he observed the glowing blue energy encased in the heart of the Nexus Core. If we can't get this online in the next 12 hours, Earth is done for. But even as the team scrambled to activate the core, something unexpected happened. A transmission from one of the last human fleets flickered onto their screens, a crackling message from Commander Derek Asher, the captain of the Defiant, one of humanity's most advanced warships. We can't hold them off any longer. The Tarvoth are pushing through our defenses. We're outnumbered. Earth needs to prepare for the worst. The Tarvoth are coming for the planet next. They will be here within days. The words hit like a blow to the gut. Earth was the final target, the last refuge. There would be no more time for evacuation, no more time for hope. But then, something strange happened. A faint signal, hidden beneath the noise of Asher's transmission, cut through. A coded message. The humans' ancient ancestors had left behind something more than just the Nexus core. The hidden archives, locked away for centuries, contained the key to turning the tide. They had been preparing for this moment long before humanity had even realized it. And now, the secret of the Nexus core was humanity's only chance. In the depths of Earth's command center, General Hargrave turned to the closest officer. "Prepare the fleet," she said, her voice cold but steady. "We're not waiting for anyone else to save us. We're going to show the galaxy what humanity is capable of." And in that moment, the humans made their decision. They would fight back. With the Nexus core, they would unleash a new kind of power, one that would either save them or damn them all. The storm had begun, and there would be no turning back. The Nexus core pulsed with an otherworldly energy as it was brought to life, a constant thrum reverberating through the chamber. Dr. Samuel Reynolds could feel the raw power of it, the hum resonating deep within his bones. The team of scientists and engineers had worked day and night, deciphering long-forgotten codes, manipulating arcane machinery that was far beyond their understanding. The technology of the ancient civilization that had created the Nexus core seemed almost incomprehensible. But as their work continued, one truth became clear. This was not just a weapon. It was something more, something capable of altering the very fabric of reality itself. Reynolds stood before the core, his hands shaking from both excitement and fear. They had known this was humanity's last hope, but now that it was alive, the enormity of their actions hit him. "Do we even understand what we're dealing with?" he muttered to himself. But the question was already rhetorical. There was no time for doubt. The Tarvoth were closing in, and the fate of humanity depended on whatever the Nexus core could do. Across the globe, panic had already set in. The Tarvoth were relentless. As Earth's military began to prepare for the final stand, Hargrave and her command staff were on high alert. The city shields were being fortified, and every available vessel was being readied for combat. But even as humanity's defenses began to solidify, they could feel the crushing weight of the coming storm. "Report," General Hargrave ordered, her voice stern as she stood before a holographic display of the Earth's defenses. "We've identified the Tarvoth's movements," said Commander Evan Martinez, her right-hand officer. "They're concentrating their forces near the orbit of Venus. It's clear they intend to make Earth their final target. Estimates put their arrival at just under 48 hours. Hargrave's eyes narrowed as she studied the tactical readouts. She knew there was no way the remaining Earth fleet could hold off the Tarvoth. Even with the best technology humanity had to offer, they stood no chance against the sheer power of the Tarvoth warships. Then her mind flashed to the Nexus core. "If we deploy this, can we use it to turn the tide?" she asked, her gaze fixed on Reynolds, who had been brought in for his expertise. Reynolds was silent for a long moment. The question hung in the air, heavier than any of the warships orbiting the planet. The Nexus core was humanity's last hope, but no one knew exactly how it would react in battle. Would it give them the power to defeat the Tarvoth, or would it destroy them in the process? "We've only scratched the surface," Reynolds replied slowly. "We've learned to harness its energy for weapon systems and shields, but we haven't yet unlocked its full potential. It's dangerous. This thing is ancient, and it doesn't work the way our technology does. But if we can integrate it into the fleet's systems, it might just be our only chance." Hargrave nodded grimly. "Then we do it. We integrate it." Now, the human fleets, desperate but determined, were mobilized like never before. The Nexus core was installed into the flagship, the Titan's Wrath, the largest warship humanity had ever constructed. A crack team of engineers worked around the clock, retrofitting it with the strange energy from the core. It wasn't just a matter of plugging in new components. They had to learn to channel an alien power that defied their understanding of physics. The crew, many of whom had volunteered for this dangerous task, knew that the success or failure of the mission would determine whether humanity survived. As the final preparations were made, the world held its breath. Hargrave stood on the bridge of the Titan's Wrath, watching as the flagship's engines came online. The ship's hull crackled with energy as the Nexus core's power surged through it, and for a brief moment, Hargrave felt something she had not felt in months. "We're ready, General," said Captain Alina Calloway, standing beside her. "We've linked the Nexus core to the ship's weaponry. It's almost like it's alive." Hargrave felt a chill run down her spine. "Good, because if it doesn't work, we're all dead." The human fleet, now armed with the full force of the Nexus core's power, launched into the cold vacuum of space. Earth's last line of defense, a ragtag coalition of military ships and hastily reinforced civilian vessels, formed up behind the Titan's Wrath. The Tarvoth's fleet loomed on the horizon, massive and imposing, like a wall of iron heading straight for them. Their ships were sleek, cruel, with sharp, angled silhouettes that seemed to mock humanity's desperate position. But humanity wasn't backing down. As the fleets closed in on each other, General Hargrave issued the command. "All ships, prepare for battle. Target the largest Tarvoth ship first. Let's see how they like a taste of humanity's will." The first salvo was fired, a brilliant flash of energy as the Nexus core-powered weapons on the Titan's Wrath discharged. The beam of concentrated energy ripped through space, striking a Tarvoth battleship square in its hull. The resulting explosion was unlike anything humanity had ever seen. The Tarvoth ship disintegrated into a cloud of molten debris, sending shockwaves through the fleet. The Tarvoth, who had never before encountered a force like this, were stunned. Their retaliatory fire was swift, but the human fleet, now bolstered by the strange power of the Nexus core, fought back with renewed determination. The battle was on. Humanity's response had been far more than the Tarvoth had anticipated, and for the first time, the tide seemed to turn. But General Hargrave knew that this was only the beginning. The battle for Earth had just started, and a real test was still ahead. They had the power to strike back, but would it be enough? The battle in the skies above Earth raged on, a terrifying dance of destruction as humanity's fleet clashed against the Tarvoth invaders. The Titan's Wrath, with its newly integrated Nexus core, cut a path through the enemy ranks, its weaponry firing with a brilliance that left the Tarvoth scrambling to adapt. Humanity had never shown this kind of ferocity before, and the Tarvoth, accustomed to overwhelming their enemies with sheer force, were now faced with something they hadn't anticipated: resilience. Yet, despite the initial success, the cost of this newfound power was becoming painfully clear. General Lydia Hargrave watched from the command deck, her face a mask of resolve. But even as humanity's forces landed devastating blows against the Tarvoth fleet, the strain on the Titan's Wrath was undeniable. The ship groaned under the weight of the Nexus core's power, and the constant barrage of enemy fire only made it worse. Systems flickered, and alarms blared as the ship's energy reserves began to deplete at an alarming rate. "General," said Commander Martinez, his voice tight with concern, "we're reaching critical levels. The core is pulling too much energy. If we don't manage it soon, it could overload the entire ship." Hargrave nodded, her mind working through the possibilities. The Nexus core had given them the upper hand, but now it was threatening to tear them apart. It wasn't just a weapon. It was a force of nature, a volatile power that no one had fully understood before. The question now was whether humanity's fragile infrastructure could withstand its might. Cut power to non-essential systems, Hargrave ordered. We need to stabilize the core, or we're done. Her crew scrambled, working feverishly to reroute energy and stabilize the ship's systems. But in the chaos of battle, there was little room for error. The Tarvoth were relentless, regrouping quickly despite their losses, and now they seemed more cautious, as though they were beginning to understand the threat humanity posed. Meanwhile, on the ground, the situation was no better. Earth's cities had become war zones. The Tarvoth, having landed in several key locations, unleashed their brutal ground forces, biomechanical beasts designed to tear through anything in their path. The streets of New York, Paris, Tokyo, these symbols of human civilization, had been reduced to rubble in a matter of hours. But even in the face of this destruction, the human spirit held firm. The resistance was growing. In the remains of a shattered city block, a ragtag group of survivors had banded together, led by Commander Derek Asher, the captain of the Defiant. His fleet had been decimated, and now he was one of the few remaining voices of resistance on the surface. Set up defensive positions. Asher barked to his squad. We hold this line, or Earth falls today. His words were met with grim determination. Humanity was not going down without a fight. The survivors scavenged weapons and supplies, using every bit of ingenuity they had to create makeshift defenses. Even in the heart of destruction, they refused to surrender. Back in space, the battle was reaching a tipping point. The Tarvoth, although taken off guard by humanity's defiance, had regrouped and adapted. Their ships, though damaged, were more than capable of retaliating with devastating force. A massive Tarvoth warship, its dark silhouette dominating the battlefield, opened fire with a barrage of plasma missiles aimed directly at the Titan's wrath. The human flagship rocked violently as it absorbed the blows. Hull plating began to buckle under the strain, and a red warning flashed across the bridge. The Nexus core, which had been their salvation, now seemed like a ticking time bomb. "General," shouted Lieutenant Carlson, his voice strained. "We've got multiple breaches in the aft section. We can't take much more of this." Hargrave's eyes narrowed as she studied the battle ahead. The human fleet, though emboldened by their new power, was clearly at a disadvantage in terms of numbers. The Tarvoth still had the upper hand, and it was only a matter of time before their overwhelming firepower overwhelmed humanity's defenses. They needed to turn the tide, and they needed to do it fast. "We're not done yet," Hargrave said firmly, a steely resolve in her voice. "All ships, concentrate fire on that warship. We'll give it everything we've got." The fleet responded, firing everything they had in a coordinated barrage. The energy beams from the Nexus core flared bright, cutting through the Tarvoth warship's shields, leaving it vulnerable. For a moment, it seemed as though the tide would turn. Then, with an ear-shattering explosion, the Tarvoth warship's center ruptured, a brilliant burst of light illuminating the battlefield. But the victory was short-lived. Before the human forces could capitalize on the advantage, the Tarvoth unleashed their counterstrike, a massive pulse of energy from their largest vessel, a shockwave that tore through the battlefield, ripping apart human ships and sending debris floating through space. On the Titan's wrath, Hargrave was thrown from her command chair as the ship shuddered violently, nearly losing its stability. Her hands gripped the edge of the console, fighting to maintain control as the Nexus core flickered erratically. The ship was on the brink of failure, but the Tarvoth were not going to give them any time to recover. Their forces surged forward, ready to finish what they had started. "We're not finished yet, Hargrave," Martine said, grimly locking eyes with her. "The core's power is ours, but at what cost?" Hargrave stood, unyielding. "We'll survive. We have to survive. Push forward." The battle was far from over. Humanity had taken a powerful step, but it came with consequences. The Nexus core was their salvation, but the price of wielding such power might very well destroy them all. The Titan's wrath groaned under the strain as another salvo of plasma fire rocked the flagship. The air in the command center was thick with tension. Hargrave could feel the weight of every moment pressing down on her shoulders. The Tarvath forces were relentless, and despite their technological edge, humanity's defense was fragile, like a brittle shell around a beating heart. The Nexus core pulsed erratically, its power surging and fading like a heartbeat that couldn't decide whether to keep going or give out completely. Sparks flew from consoles across the bridge as the energy stabilizers fought to keep the ship intact. The crew scrambled to contain the damage. "We've lost forward shields," shouted Lieutenant Carlson. "Hull integrity at critical levels. Another hit like that, and we won't survive it." Hargrave's jaw clenched. The Tarvath knew it. They were no longer just fighting for control of Earth. They were trying to destroy the last bastion of human resistance. The Nexus core had granted them power, yes, but the cost was becoming too high to ignore. Every shot from the enemy was pushing the ship closer to the edge of oblivion. But Hargrave couldn't let up. She knew that this was humanity's moment. If they faltered now, it would be the end of everything. The stakes were too high. "Recalibrate the core," Hargrave ordered, her voice unwavering. "We have to get it back under control, or we'll be a sitting target." Her order was met with a frantic scramble of activity. Dr. Reynolds, who had been monitoring the Nexus core from a secondary control station, looked up, his face pale. "General, I don't know if we can stabilize it anymore. The energy fluctuations are too erratic. If we push it beyond its current output, there's a high probability that it could destroy the entire ship, along with the rest of the fleet." Hargrave's gaze hardened. "We've got no choice. The Tarvath are already trying to take us out. If we don't act now, they'll finish us off." As the crew worked to stabilize the core, Hargrave's mind flashed back to the early days of the invasion, the helplessness she had felt as humanity watched their colonies fall one by one. She remembered the words of the commander of the Defiant, Derek Asher, as he broadcast his final transmission to Earth. It had been a bleak message, the last hope of a captain trying to protect his crew. But that hope was fading, like a dimming star on the edge of the universe. But humanity had something that Tarvath didn't: resilience. General Hargrave turned back to the view screen. The Tarvath fleet was closing in, their ships massive and ominous, the distance between them and Earth shrinking by the second. If they didn't act fast, Earth's last defense would be gone in a flash of fire and destruction. "Captain Calloway," Hargrave said, her voice cutting through the chaos, "get us into position to fire everything we've got at their command ship. We need to end this. Now." Calloway's face was tight with concentration as she gave the order. The Titan's wrath groaned again as it changed course, dodging another round of Tarvath fire. The Nexus core hummed ominously, the ship's systems flickering as the energy level surged beyond safe limits. "General, we've got one shot at this," Calloway warned. "We fire everything at once, and we need to hit them with everything we've got. It's all or nothing." Hargrave nodded, a steely resolve in her eyes. "Do it." On the command deck, every officer was poised, their hands ready to pull the triggers. The Nexus core was being pushed to its limits, its energy siphoned into every weapon system humanity had left. The Titan's wrath was a glowing, pulsating behemoth, the heart of humanity's last stand. The ship's cannons powered up, their enormous barrels glowing with blinding light. The Tarvath command ship loomed on the view screen, its dark hull scared but still intimidating. The time for hesitation was over. "All ships, lock onto the Tarvath flagship. Fire on my mark," Hargrave ordered. The Titan's wrath fired first, a brilliant beam of pure energy that shot out from the core like a spear of light. The beam hit the Tarvath ship with such force that the enemy vessel shuddered, massive chunks of its hull disintegrating into space. But the Tarvath weren't done. They fired back with a fury that shook the ship to its core. The blast was so powerful that it temporarily overwhelmed the human fleet's shields, sending the Titan's wrath reeling. But the human fleet pressed on, one by one. Every remaining ship fired everything they had. The Tarvath flagship staggered, its shields collapsing under the barrage. Another hit, then another. The Tarvath flagship's outer hull began to fragment, sparks flying from the breach. And then, just when it seemed like they might succeed, the unthinkable happened. The Nexus core flared uncontrollably, an unearthly howl ringing through the ship as energy discharged wildly through the corridors. Hargrave's heart skipped a beat. The power was reaching its peak, and there was no way to stop it. The overload was imminent. "General, we need tow." Martinez's voice was cut off by a deafening explosion. The Nexus core was reaching its critical limit. If it detonated, it would take the Titan's wrath, and Earth's last defense, along with it. Hargrave turned toward the screen, knowing that this was humanity's final moment. Either the Nexus core would destroy them, or they would bring down the Tarvath. She could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her, but one thing was clear. They had fought too hard to give up now. The Titan's wrath shuddered violently as another wave of Tarvath fire slammed into its hull. Sparks erupted from consoles, and the hum of the Nexus core fluctuated erratically, each pulse growing more unstable. General Hargrave gripped the armrest of her chair, bracing herself against the tremors shaking the bridge. "We can't hold on much longer." Lieutenant Carlson shouted over the noise, sweat dripping from his forehead, as he scrambled to keep the ship's systems from collapsing entirely. The Nexus core is pushing past its limits. It's only a matter of time before it detonates. Hargrave's gaze was fixed on the view screen, watching as the Tarvath flagship continued to take hits, but still stood, dark and menacing. The human fleet was faltering, its ships battered, and nearly out of ammunition. The Titan's wrath was their last hope, but it was on the verge of being torn apart. "We can't afford to let up," Hargrave snapped, her voice cutting through the panic. "We have to finish this now, or Earth is lost." Captain Calloway, who had been fighting to keep the ship in one piece, turned from her station. "General, the Tarvath flagship is starting to move into firing position. They're preparing a full-scale blast aimed at the Titan's wrath. If they fire at full power, we won't survive." "We've got no choice," Hargrave said, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "Prepare to fire again, all ships. We push everything into this next strike. We end this today." On the view screen, the Titan's wrath flickered as it recalibrated its remaining weapon systems. The Nexus core, strained and battered, hummed louder than ever, its energy threatening to overload at any second. Hargrave could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. Everything had come down to this final confrontation. She had no more moves left. The human fleet, barely functional but desperate, rallied together. Despite their shattered condition, they had no intention of giving up. The Tarvath, as powerful as they were, had underestimated the tenacity of humanity. It was a final gamble, but it was the only one they had. Hargrave's voice rang out, commanding, "All ships, fire." The Titan's wrath unleashed everything it had. A storm of energy, raw and blinding, erupted from its cannons, tearing through the void in a brilliant arc. The Nexus core, in its desperate bid for survival, funneled every last ounce of its power into the weapons, sending the beam straight for the Tarvath flagship. The Tarvath ship responded in kind. A massive, concentrated plasma beam shot toward the Titan's wrath, its intensity enough to vaporize anything in its path. The two energy beams collided in the vacuum of space, a violent, searing explosion of light and power that illuminated the battlefield for miles. Hargrave's heart raced as the ship rocked again, the blast so immense that it sent shockwaves through the hull. She held onto the console, her breath caught in her throat. The Titan's wrath had taken the full brunt of the blast, but it had not been enough. The Tarvath flagship had been struck hard. The view screen flickered as the Tarvath vessel's outer hull began to buckle under the sustained barrage. The energy discharge from the Nexus core had torn through its shields, and now, with the Tarvath flagship weakening, humanity's final push was beginning to take effect. "General, it's working," Commander Martinez shouted. "The flagship's shields are failing. We've broken through their outer defenses." Hargrave's mind raced as she watched the Tarvath ship's hull fragment, pieces of its armored exterior floating into space. But even as the Tarvath flagship staggered, the explosion from the Nexus core still reverberated throughout the Titan's wrath. The ship was already on the brink of collapse, and Hargrave knew that they couldn't withstand another direct hit. "We need to pull back," Lieutenant Carlson warned. "If we don't disengage now, the Titan's wrath won't make it." But Hargrave knew that there was no pulling back. The Tarvath flagship was vulnerable now. This was their chance. If they didn't finish the job, the Tarvath would recover, and all their sacrifices would have been in vain. "No retreat," Hargrave said, her voice cold with determination. "We fight to the end." As the Titan's wrath plunged into the heart of the Tarvath fleet, another explosion rocked the ship. The Nexus core sputtered, a final pulse of unstable energy blasting across the bridge, knocking several crew members to the floor. But Hargrave remained standing, her eyes locked onto the Tarvath flagship as it lurched forward, ready to strike again. The human fleet, broken and battered, followed her lead, charging into the heart of the battle. The remaining ships fired their weapons with everything they had, and the Tarvath flagship's defenses crumpled under the onslaught. It was a last-ditch effort, fueled by desperation, but the Tarvath flagship was faltering. Then, with a blinding flash, the Titan's wrath fired its final shot. A concentrated pulse of energy, the last of the Nexus core's power, tore through the Tarvath flagship's core, and the ship erupted in a cataclysmic explosion that sent shockwaves rippling through the battlefield. For a moment, everything went silent. The stars in the sky seemed to pause, frozen in time. Then, the silence shattered as the remaining Tarvath ships began to scatter, disoriented, their command vessel destroyed. "We did it," Martinez whispered, staring at the destruction. The Tarvath fleet, once invincible, was now in disarray. But the victory felt hollow. The Titan's wrath was barely functional, the Nexus core in its final moments of life. Hargrave looked around at the bridge, the faces of her crew, every one of them bloodied, weary, and uncertain. The cost of this victory had been immense, and there was no telling what the future held. The Tarvath were still out there, scattered, but not entirely vanquished. And Earth had won, but at a terrible price. The Nexus core had given them the power to defeat the invaders, but its cost had left humanity in a precarious position. "Where do we go from here?" Hargrave asked, her voice barely a whisper. The silence was heavy. No one had an answer. The silence after the destruction of the Tarvath flagship was deafening, and for a moment, it felt as though the entire universe had stopped moving. The once mighty Tarvath fleet, scattered and broken, seemed to hang in the void, vulnerable and uncertain. Humanity had won, against all odds. The Tarvath were no longer an unstoppable force, but the victory felt like a hollow triumph. General Hargrave stood in the center of the command bridge, her eyes scanning the view screen, now filled with the debris of the battlefield. The Tarvath ships that remained were regrouping, but they were disoriented, their communications disrupted. Earth had fought back with everything they had, and for the first time in months, Hargrave allowed herself a breath, however shallow. But even in the midst of the victory, the ship itself groaned, its once pristine systems now flickering and failing. The Titan's wrath was a wreck, its hull battered beyond repair, its engines sputtering. The Nexus core, the source of their power, was all but spent, its unstable energy levels dangerously low. "General, we've lost the main engines," Lieutenant Carlson reported, his voice grim. "The core's reached critical overload. It's on the verge of detonating. We need to evacuate. Now." Hargrave's heart sank. They had made it this far, but now, with victory within their grasp, the ship itself was on the verge of total collapse. The idea of abandoning the Titan's wrath, humanity's last line of defense, was anathema to her, but she knew the reality. "How much time do we have?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her gut. Carlson's face tightened. "Maybe 30 minutes, if we're lucky. The core could blow any second." "Understood," Hargrave said, her mind racing. There was no time for sentiment now. They had won the battle, but the war wasn't over. Evacuate the non-essential personnel. Get them to the escape pods. As for the rest of us, we hold the line until the last possible second. We won't be able to hold off the Tarvoth for long," Captain Calloway said, stepping forward. Her uniform was torn, and her face was streaked with sweat and grime, but there was a fire in her eyes that Hargrave recognized. The same fire that had fueled their resistance all this time. "We won't need to hold them off for long," Hargrave replied. "The Tarvoth are scattered. We've crippled their fleet, and they'll need time to reorganize. We've given ourselves a breathing room. We just need to make sure the Titan's wrath doesn't become a beacon for their return." Martinez, standing nearby, spoke up, his voice tinged with concern. "General, there's something else. The last of the Tarvoth ships, the ones that are still intact, they're retreating. They're not just abandoning the battlefield. They're pulling back toward the core of their empire. Something's up." Hargrave frowned. She had expected retaliation, not retreat. The Tarvoth had shown no mercy before, so why would they stop now? "Do we have a full scan of their retreating ships?" she asked. "Yes," Martinez confirmed, "but it doesn't make sense. They're heading toward an uncharted system, a place they've never gone before." A chill ran down Hargrave's spine. The Tarvoth were not the kind of species to run without a purpose. She had been hoping that this victory would mark the beginning of humanity's recovery. But if the Tarvoth were retreating to regroup, if they were preparing something bigger, it meant that their fight was far from over. "Captain," Hargrave said, "send a full report to Earth Command. Tell them to prepare for the worst. The Tarvoth may be gone, but I don't think they're finished yet." Calloway nodded, her face set in determination. "Aye, General. I'll get the message out immediately." As the crew worked to secure the ship and evacuate, Hargrave retreated to her quarters. Alone, she allowed herself a moment of reflection, looking out at the stars. It felt like a lifetime ago that she had been a young officer, dreaming of fighting in space. Now she was leading humanity's survival, and the burden of that was more than she ever imagined. The victory felt incomplete. Earth was safe. For now. But the cost had been staggering. Entire cities were lost. Millions had perished. And now, even though the Tarvoth had been defeated, the uncertainty of the future loomed large. What was left of the human race? Was this truly the end of the Tarvoth threat, or just the beginning of something far worse? "General Hargrave." A voice interrupted her thoughts. She turned to see Dr. Reynolds standing in the doorway, his face lined with worry. "What is it, Doctor?" "The Nexus core. It's not just going to destroy the ship. I've been running simulations, and if the core detonates in this system, the explosion could destabilize the entire sector. The damage would be catastrophic, and there's no way we'd survive it. We need to neutralize it immediately." Hargrave's stomach twisted. They couldn't afford another catastrophe. Not now, not when they were so close to securing Earth's future. "How much time do we have?" Reynolds' face fell. "Not much. Maybe 15 minutes at best." Hargrave didn't hesitate. She turned to the comm system. "All remaining personnel, this is General Hargrave. We need to neutralize the Nexus core immediately. This is our last mission. Make sure your evacuation is underway. Once the core is stabilized, we leave this ship behind." She cut the comms and faced the remaining crew. "We have no more time to waste. We make this count. For Earth." The countdown to the Nexus core's critical overload was ticking down with relentless precision, the numbers flashing on every monitor in the Titan's Wrath bridge. General Hargrave stood motionless, her eyes fixed on the rapidly escalating danger, as if willing time to slow, just long enough for her to make the right decision. The last moments of the battle had left the ship shattered, but humanity's fight was far from over. "We're running out of time, General," Dr. Reynolds said, his voice strained with the weight of the moment. He stood next to Hargrave, his hands flying over the terminal in front of him. "The core's unstable, and if we don't neutralize it soon, the chain reaction could spread beyond our system. The entire sector could be lost." Hargrave felt the gravity of his words settle like a stone in her chest. Even after the victory over the Tarvoth, the price of that victory could be far higher than she had anticipated. The Tarvoth were retreating, but their war was far from over. And now, the Titan's wrath, the vessel that had been humanity's last hope, was about to become the weapon of their own undoing. "Get me access to the core's main conduits," Hargrave ordered, her voice calm, despite the chaos around her. "We have to contain it now, before it gets any worse." Reynolds nodded, pulling up another set of diagnostic readings. "It's not just a matter of shutting it down. There's an overload of quantum energy coming from the core. If we don't dissipate it in the next few minutes, the ship itself will become the detonator. We need to channel it safely into the void." Hargrave's mind raced. Channeling a dying star's worth of energy into space would require precision. She looked at the crew, all of them working in tandem despite their exhaustion, and felt a surge of gratitude. They had been through hell and back together, and they weren't about to give up now. "Captain Calloway, secure the evacuation. Once the core is stabilized, I want every single person off this ship. Leave nothing to chance," Hargrave commanded, her eyes burning with resolve. "Aye, General," Calloway replied, her voice tight. "We've already lost too much. I'll ensure the last of the crew is out." Hargrave turned back to Reynolds. "Let's do this. How do we shut the damn thing down?" Reynolds wiped a bead of sweat from his brow. "It's a 1 in a million chance, General. We'd need to reroute the core's energy into the primary bypass conduits. But that's not the hard part. The core's systems are linked directly to the ship's systems, and to manually bypass, the fail-safes will make the ship self-destruct." Hargrave finished for him. "We don't have a choice." "Exactly. Then we're going to make it work." She stepped forward, resolute. "I'll take the risk. Get me into the bypass conduits." The crew watched in stunned silence as Hargrave's words sank in. The general was prepared to sacrifice herself to save the ship, but no one moved to stop her. They understood the stakes. In the bowels of the Titan's wrath, the metal corridors seemed even darker now, the hum of the Nexus core echoing in the distance. Hargrave moved swiftly, flanked by a small team of engineers who were already working to secure the energy conduits. Each step felt heavier than the last, the knowledge that they were racing against time pressing down on her. "General, are you sure about this?" Engineer Harris asked, his voice uncertain. Hargrave gave him a reassuring look. "There's no time for second guesses. If we don't act now, all of Earth will pay the price for our failure." They reached the core's chamber, the room aglow with the pulsing energy of the Nexus core, an unnatural light that cast shifting shadows across the walls. It was a thing of awe and terror, a creation of unimaginable power, power that had been humanity's salvation, but now threatened to be their undoing. Hargrave approached the central console, where Reynolds was already at work, typing in commands with practiced precision. The room crackled with unstable energy, the core straining as though it was alive, yearning to escape its containment. "Ready when you are," Reynolds said, his voice trembling slightly. "Do it." With a final series of keystrokes, the core's systems hummed louder, the feedback vibrating through the floor beneath them. The containment fields began to shift as the core's energy was redirected, the immense power flowing into the bypass conduits that led toward the void of space. It was working. Barely. But then, the unthinkable happened. The core bucked violently, a surge of uncontrolled energy flooding through the conduits. A loud, resonant hum filled the room as Hargrave felt her knees weaken under the pressure. The ship shook as if in protest. The containment shields had failed to stabilize the energy in time. "Pull back," Reynolds shouted. "It's too much. We're running out of time." Hargrave looked around. The energy levels were spiking. The countdown had reached the final seconds. "I'm not leaving," she said firmly. "We can't let this destroy everything we'd fought for." With a final push of will, Hargrave reached into the control panel, pulling the manual override lever. The room shuddered violently, and for a moment, it felt as though the entire ship was about to tear apart. Then, a sudden, overwhelming stillness descended. The Nexus core's pulse steadied. The catastrophic energy release was contained, funneled out into the vast expanse of space. But the ship was done. Hargrave staggered backward, her breath ragged. The core was stabilized, but only just. The Titan's wrath would never fly again. The remaining crew flooded into the chamber, helping to evacuate Hargrave and the others. As they made their way toward the escape pods, Hargrave glanced out the viewport. The Tarvoth had retreated, their fleet scattered, but the stars were silent now. Earth had survived, but it had come at a great cost. The war was over for now, and the human race would rebuild again. As the escape pods launched, Hargrave's final thought was not of victory, but of humanity's endless resolve to face the impossible, to endure and to rise, no matter what came next.